Hello, my name is Ari and welcome back. Today we're gonna go over my June wrap up, and I read a lot in June, so this is gonna be a little bit of a long one. In June I read 21 books, which is more books than May, but overall it was fewer pages. I did have quite a few tournaments for work in June, so my outside of work free time was considerably more limited than it was in May. So it happens. I read a total of 6,596 pages, which averaged at 314 pages per book and 220 pages per day. One of my overall reading goals for myself is to read all across different genres and age ranges, because I know I love fantasy books, but I don't want to limit myself to only reading fantasy. I want to expand my reading genres into all sorts of different areas of interest, and kind of grow as a person through reading. So because I am just reading things that I don't know where I'm going to stand on, a lot of the books, or there's a lot higher chance that I'm not going to love everything I read. My goal this year is to hit a solid 3 stars and just to read as many diversified genres as I can. With that being said, 7 of the books that I read this month were young adult, 1 was a middle grade, and 13 of them were adult novels. 3 of them were contemporary, 5 were just general fiction, if you go to a bookstore they're under fiction. 2 of them were dystopias, 3 of them were nonfiction, 1 was horror, 2 of them were graphic novels, 1 was historical fiction, and 4 were fantasy. I had 1 1-star read, 2 2-star reads, 9 3-star reads, 9 4-star reads, and 0 5-star reads, which is pretty normal for me. 5 stars and 1 stars are super, super rare. 10 of the books I read in June were for my Century Reads Challenge, where I read 1 book published every year from 1900 to 2020, and June was the 1950s. I have a completely separate wrap-up for that, and I will put that up in the cards. 2 of the books that I read were arcs. Both of those arcs were from NetGalley. The first one was Chosen Ones by Veronica Roth, which I gave 3 stars, but it was kind of a lower tier of 3 stars, which was, this was okay, I guess. The premise of that book was a chosen one is destined to fight a dark one, and the chosen one prophecy is very vague, as prophecies are, so it could have fit multiple children, and the US government kind of rounded up a bunch of children who fit the prophecy and just assumed one of them would be the chosen one, and then trained them to fight the dark one. It 14, 15 around there, and then they defeated the dark one in their late teens and saved the world. And this book takes place when these chosen ones are in their 30s, and it's been 10 years since they defeated the dark one, and kind of what do you do once you've defeated the dark one, you're world famous, and you kind of have to go on with your life. And what this promised to be was a story of PTSD and trauma and celebrity when the chosen ones didn't necessarily want to be celebrities, but that's what it promises to be. But that only lasts about like a third way through the book, and then it gets into this like weird like multiple dimensions where timelines split off in different ways type of thing, and then the chosen ones have to go to an alternate dimension and battle somebody else's dark one because their chosen one died. And that's not what I wanted out of this book. I wanted an exploration of PTSD and how like happy endings maybe don't end so happily, and that's not what I got at all. Overall, the story was okay. I was just immensely disappointed by the misleading premise of it. The other arc I read was the AntiVirginity Pact by Kate Wismer. She is a booktuber called Kate's Book Date, I believe. I'll have her channel linked in the description below. I really enjoy her videos, even though we don't particularly share the same taste in books. So I was very unsure of how I was going to feel about this book going into it because it's young adult contemporary, and I don't particularly care for contemporary, especially young adult contemporary. Usually teenagers annoy the fuck out of me because I'm old. So adult people writing teenagers tend to write them as like whiny little bitches, and I just don't care enough. I want to say that I am pleasantly surprised that Kate does not allow her teenage characters to get away with they're just kids and endlessly do stupid shit for no reason with no adult supervision. Like, these children have parents. There are consequences to their actions. They act like believable teenagers who face emotional consequences in like real life ways. Like, they make sense as human beings and not vapid little assholes. There are some subplots in there that like a little bit out there, but nothing that really took away my overall enjoyment of the book. The book does deal with hard-hitting topics such as attempted sexual assault, homosexuality in a very Christian family, but it does it in a way that reflects believable behavior from both the children and the adults in this situation, where the children aren't idiots just because they're teenagers and the adults aren't idiots just because it's a book written for teenagers. The pacing was amazing. I didn't feel rushed with the climax. I didn't feel like it was dragging on at any points. I continuously read it with no like need to be like, okay, I'm bored with the subject, I need to take a break, I'm gonna put this down and come back to it tomorrow. Like, I binge read this book and read it straight through. And I really, really appreciated it that being in a relationship wasn't like the be-all, end-all answer to solve the main character's like problems. Like, the book doesn't end with they lived happily ever after, because that's not fucking real. Especially for a 16-year-old kid. So very, very much enjoyed this. 4 stars. Highly, highly recommend you buy this book and support Kate. Both of those books are out now. Chosen Ones I did get as like an arc like well after it released for some reasons, and the AntiVirginity Pact came out in the beginning of June. Next up was my book club pick for the month. I participate in Belle's book club through Instagram, and Belle picks a genre. Well, I should say the community picks a genre each month, and then Belle picks 3 books from that genre for us to choose from, and then we read the book that gets the majority votes. June was, I think, contemporary romance, or I don't remember. Either just contemporary or contemporary romance. And the book that we chose was The Identicals by Elin Hilderbrand. This is the most offensive trash book I have ever read in my entire life. This was my 1-star book of the month. This was so disgustingly problematic. I just read the end of this book. All of the characters are supposed to be very unlikable people, at least in the beginning. And the way that she wrote this was so lazy to make the characters unlikable. It's just like, what can you think of are like the worst characteristics in people, and we're gonna assign these to these people and then somehow try to redeem them because they fall in love. And let me tell you, none of these characters got redeemed for me, but she did a really good job of making me hate them. But a lot of the ways that she wrote this makes me think that the author is racist and fatphobic and homophobic and every other kind of brand of white people you hate. There's like little things in here, like one of the characters was fat shamed for being a size 4. Like, are you fucking kidding me? I'm like a size 12. I can't imagine calling somebody a size 4 fat by any stretch of the imagination, but it's done in here. I did do some tabbing of things that I wanted to point out of just like really shitty things. First off was the racism that was excused, where the words in this book are literally, Eleanor isn't a blatant racist, she's old-fashioned. She calls black people Negroes. Excuse me? This was written in 2017. That's not old-fashioned, that's racist. Also, Eleanor being racist was literally brought up this one time in this book. It came out of nowhere. There are absolutely no people of color in this scene. It was literally a throwaway line to set up Eleanor as a dislikable character. And I promise you, Eleanor could be dislikable and did a great job of making me hate her without this literal single one-off throwaway line about racism. Now, what makes me think that the author herself is racist and not just making the characters racist for convenient dislikability is something that I can't really quote because it's not just one line, but one of the twins, because they're identical twins, is dating a black man, and this man's mother is part of like the town council, and the identical twin, she was arrested for some like trafficking cocaine accidentally, whatever. That's not the point. But this black man's mother is supposed to be very, very high up in the town council and supposed to be well liked and well respected in the community. But for some reason, her and her sister don't know that Harper has been arrested for this, don't know the rumors, because the drug dealer didn't sell to black people. Do you see the problem with this? It's like, you're saying that because these people are black, they're others, and they're not part of the white community, so don't know the gossip of the white community. And that makes the author racist and not the character. Another thing that really bothered me about this was slut shaming. Like, Harper was having an affair with a married man, which, another reason to dislike her, but the entire time in the book, everybody blamed her for the affair, and no blame and no shame was ever levied on the fucking married man who was having an affair. And throughout the book, it was just like, it's her fault that this affair happened. And like, what? Her twin sister is equally dislikable. She's very self-centered, very stuck up, blames her sister for everything that's ever gone wrong in her entire life, and she's a really shitty mother. She's got like a 16-year-old daughter, and does nothing to actually raise her own daughter. It just blames literally every failing of her life on her mother or her sister, and makes no attempt to actually live life for herself or take any sort of responsibility. And I hate people who won't take responsibility for their actions. So after that lovely rant, 1 star, I highly recommend that you never read any fucking thing ever by this author. You're welcome for that recommendation. Moving right along, I read 2 books for my 2019 Goodreads Challenge Awards completionist project, where I'm trying to read at least 2 books from each category. And those books were Know My Name by Chanel Miller, which is a memoir about, or from the perspective of the young woman, Chanel Miller, who was sexually assaulted on the Stanford campus by Brock Turner. And it was kind of her starting from like the night before, and then kind of going through like the the court process of having to accuse her rapist and go to court, face him every single day, not be able to like live this down for an entire year, and not be able to like escape the trauma of it when she didn't even really remember what happened to her. And then the constant, it's really about how our court system fails rape victims miserably. 'Cause during the entire proceeding, it was always how she was somehow at fault for her getting raped. Why did she go to this party? Why drink? Her accusing him is ruining his life, as if him raping her is not ruining her life. Like, no one cared about the effect it had on her life in the justice system. It was only the effect that it had on his life for him making this one bad decision. And it was heartbreaking and completely disgusting to read. If you are not a victim of sexual assault, I highly recommend that you read this book so you can gain some empathy towards all of these women coming out that they have been sexually assaulted over the years, because it happens to basically every single fucking woman. If you are a rape victim, I do not recommend reading this because it's too hard. Like, it's going to dredge up memories that you don't ever want to know. But if you've ever sat there and been like, why is this girl only talking about her sexual assault on social media? Why didn't she tell the cops? Read this book and you will understand why women don't go to the police, because it is 8,000 times more traumatizing to have to go through the system to get these men incarcerated. And then in cases like this with Brock Turner, he got off with 3 months in prison, and that's it. She had to be tortured and traumatized every single day for over 2 years through trials, and he got 3 months, and then he's free to go out there and rape somebody else because he's a rich white boy and she's not rich and Asian, and that's fucked up. Know My Name is a 4-star read, just because I have a very hard time giving nonfiction 5 stars because I didn't enjoy reading it. It was important to read, but there was no enjoyment level in it. The next book I read was Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. This was a very interesting book, and apparently this is like a theme in books right now because I've heard so many books about the same like topic, where in the 1930s, this is a historical fiction, it took place in the 1930s, where the Great Depression is happening, and the president's wife, I want to say Eleanor Roosevelt, but I could be super wrong, was made this like traveling library where women worked at the library, and it paid them a salary so they could survive during the Great Depression. And basically these women in the Kentucky mountains had a library, and they would take the books out into the mountains and like give them to people, and then come back a couple weeks later and pick up the books and then give new books to the library. And this is basically a story about 5 women who are part of this library for different reasons in a mining town in Kentucky. And it deals a whole lot with the way women are abused by white men, deemed lesser, and how these women are doing their damnedest to fight back against this very male-dominated system. I do know, or after I read this and I was writing my review, I found out that apparently there is some accusations that Jojo Moyes literally stole this entire story from a lesser-known author and then kind of just slightly changed it up. So while I did really enjoy this book, and I haven't read the other book, so I don't know how accurate the idea of theft is, I do want to read that other book and support a much less known author. So I've put it on my TBR. I don't know when I'm going to be able to get to it, but eventually I will read it. It's one of those things where, like, these women with the traveling library really did exist in real life, so there's a very decent chance that it wasn't actually stolen, because it's based on like things that really happened. It's going to depend on how close the actual like storyline is, and not just the fact that it were both about women in their traveling libraries in the 1930s. So I don't know, I can't really speak on it, but I want you to be aware of this. The last 6 books I read just because I fucking felt like it. There's no reason behind reading them, I just really decided that I wanted to read them. The first one was Uglies Cutters by Scott Westerfield. This is a graphic novel based in the Uglies universe, and I read Shay, like Uglies Shay, which is the other graphic novel in the series, like 2 months ago, and I really liked it. I'm trash for that series, so this was just another story of Shay, like from Shay's perspective, who is like a secondary character in the novel series, and I loved it. I love Shay as a character, and I like this kind of like explanation of why she is such a bitch. So it made me happy. I very much enjoyed it. Next was White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. This is a book about racism written by a white woman, and I know a lot of people have been are really mad that this is written by a white woman, but the point of this book is to teach white people about racism and why they're racist, and that comes best from somebody who has learned of her own racist tendencies. So while a person of color can tell you how it feels to have the like racism like felt towards them, telling somebody like what it feels like to be racist, even like unconsciously, should come from a white person, in my opinion. This is not like the end-all be-all place where you read this and you stop reading about racism, but this is a very interesting, like, perspective on the overall conversation of racism. And if you're listening to me talk right now and you're like, I don't need to read that, I'm not racist, you need to read this book. We're trained through our education, and entirely of our own fault, to our immediate gut reaction to somebody telling you that you've done something racist is to either just straight out deny it or say, no, I'm a good person, I'm not racist, I don't hate black people. That's not what racism in this context is about. And by doing that, you're really taking the focus away from whatever action you have performed that has offended somebody based on their race, and brought the attention to yourself and your white fragility and your anger at being called racist, instead of dealing with whatever has brought on, or whatever you've done to offend somebody of a different race. So instead of making it about yourself every time you do something that's racially insensitive, change, apologize. And this book kind of like deals with telling you to like stop instantly being offended and making it about yourself. Stop saying that racism doesn't exist because you are not personally racist. We can't talk about racism. Like, we need to talk about racism, or else it's just gonna be internalized racism and never get fixed and never change. Like, this is why we have history, and why you need to learn from your mistakes instead of just denying your mistakes. So for that reason, I think this is a really good book. I don't like that it's called White Fragility, because I think that sets off the same tone of people being offended instantly by hearing the titles, and so they don't want to read it. So the only people who are reading this are the people who probably don't need to know this stuff. This is very, very basic level stuff that most of us probably haven't thought about, just because we're all kind of super self-centered, and you think about your own feelings before you think about anybody else's. So, and that's why I recommend everybody, every white person, read this and just kind of get a perspective from somebody else's feelings and opinions, and maybe stop thinking about yourself all of the time. Fireworks. Next up is These Witches Don't Burn by Isabel Sterling. I picked this up just because I was reading a bunch of really depressing books at the beginning of the month, and this sounded like really light and fun, so I kind of wanted to read something light and fun. This wasn't actually super light and fun. This dealt with some hard-hitting topics, but it's like, I'm gonna say urban fantasy, because it takes place in the modern world, but it's about witches, like real actual magic using witches that are kind of hidden from society. They exist alongside Wiccan people, but they actually have magical powers. And it's about lesbian witches, which is kind of why I wanted to read it, because it was Pride Month. And hey, I'm down for some sapphic witch love here. Like I said, it was mostly fun, but there are some like kind of really scary, hard-hitting topics in here. And some witch hunters who want to kill the witches and maybe succeed a little bit in there. But all around, I actually really enjoyed this. I actually like instantly picked up the second book in the series, which is about a different witch coven in the same universe. So if you're looking for fantasy, but sapphic fantasy. I highly recommend this, but just know that it's not all like light and fluffy, that there are some sad parts in here. Next up, I picked up Boundless by RA Salvatore. This is one of very, very, very many books in the Forgotten Realms universe, specifically about Dritz, who is a drow. This is Dungeons and Dragons. He's a drow ranger. This is like really late in the series. This is like book, I want to say like 33 or 34 in the series. So definitely not a place to pick up with. I can't really tell you much about this because it's like book 33 in the series. So anything I say other than it's about Dritz and his friends is going to be a spoiler. But the third book in this trilogy comes out at the end of July, so I wanted to get this read in June because I have an arc of the third book in the series, which I forgot the name of already. Relentless, I think is the name of it. If you were interested in Dungeons and Dragons and you've never read any of the Dritz books, I highly recommend it. It starts with the Icewind Dale trilogy. Actually, no, that's... Icewind Dale is where it starts, like, publication date. You want the Dark Elf trilogy if you're doing it in chronological order. So depending on how you want to read it. If you want to read it publication date, Icewind Dale trilogy. If you want to read this in public or in chronological order, the Dark Elf trilogy, because the Dark Elf trilogy wasn't out when I started reading these books. It's like 20 years ago. But I do recommend with starting in chronological order and not publication order, just personally. Next up, I read a short story graphic novel collection about Native American tricksters, like mythology and lore. And it was called Trickster, Native American Tales, a graphic collection. It's by multiple authors and multiple artists. And it's literally just like legitimate Native American mythology tales set to pictures. I did read it as an ebook, and I do not recommend reading this as an ebook because the font did not translate well into an ebook, and it is very like cramped and hard to see on a lot of the stories. Like each one's done differently, so some of them were really easy to read, and then some of them that used like weird fonts were impossible to read. So if you're interested in like Native American folklore and want to have like a really easy beginning or a really easy, simple thing to read, I recommend this. It's very cute. It's all about like animals that are tricksters and they trick people, and it's got like morals to the story, but not... It's not like white people morals to the stories. Like there's no like the moral is to be good or the moral is to not trick somebody. Like the morals are like don't be stupid. So it's really, really fun to read. I just recommend getting it in a physical form. And the very last book of the month that I read in 2 days is House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. Like, oh my god. I can't, this is like 800 pages and I read it in 2 days. This was so good. I did not, like I've seen people talk about it on the internet and I even had this spoiled for me. Like I knew what was gonna happen in it and I knew I wanted to still read it, but I thought it would be kind of like mediocre. But I'm trash for this. I have no idea why I'm so trash for this, because this is not like great literature. It was just really fun and kind of exactly what I needed to get me out of like this high classic literature bullshit that I have been reading, because like I said, this was like absolute trash. Slightly pornographic. There's a love story in here, but it's slow burn, which was kind of really nice because I know Sarah J Maas, I haven't really read much by her, but I know that she is known for just being like super smutty, like right out of the gate. This was very slow burn. The main character is kind of known around town to be like a slutty party girl, who just sleeps with anybody she wants to, and she does. But she's also a really good person, and she just lets people believe whatever they want to about her, and she like legitimately does not give a shit what people thinks about her, and she still like loves people and cares about them even when they go out of their way to treat her like shit. And I really, really like characters like that. This is fantasy, so she's half fae, half human. Her love interests are anything from like shifters to angels. Like, it's all over the place. But if you want some like fantasy that's a little bit on the trashy side but still really, really well written, I recommend this. People also said that the first part of this book was slow and very info dumpy. I didn't feel like it was slow or info dumpy personally, but I also read like a lot of really high fantasy, so maybe like what I consider slow and info dumpy is like way up here when everybody else is like way down here. I don't know, but I liked it. I gave it 4 stars. It wasn't like my absolute favorite, but I binged this and I am ready for more Sarah J Maas, because I am easily becoming trash for her stories. That's everything I read. Before I sign off, I do want to go over what books I read for my Make Your MythTaker readathon, or for the Make Your MythTaker readathon last month. I did do that, and I've already talked about all the books, but I want to tell you which books I read for each prompt right now. So I started down the Oracle path under the Sorceress class, and the first book in that was to read a book blind, which is to go into a book without knowing what it's about, and for that I read Night by Eli Wiesel, which is a nonfiction account of the Holocaust, and not something anybody should ever read without knowing what that is about. I was traumatized. The next book was a book with a foiled cover, and I read Boundless for that because you can see that it's very shiny. Next up was a book about books, and for that I read Fahrenheit 451 because it's a book about burning books. Then the next prompt was 5-star prediction, which I read The Lord of the Flies for, which was 3 stars. So I predicted that wrong. I'm a horrible oracle. After finishing the Oracle path, I decided to do the Witch path, and for that the first book was a book featuring an animal, and for that I read Charlotte's Web. The second prompt was foiled covered, which I skipped because I've already read that prompt. Next prompt was a magical battle. For that I read These Witches Don't Burn, which did feature a magical battle. The last prompt for witches was a book with occult themes, and for that I read The Haunting of Hill House. Moving on from witches, I went to the goddess path. Yes, I am literally reading every single book in the sorceress paths for this. We got 2 more to go. Goddess. The first prompt was a non-human main character, and for that I read the Trickster comic. Foil cover, we've already covered. Third is the highest rated on your TBR, and for that I read Know My Name by Chanel Miller. That had like a 4.7 something rating on Goodreads. It's a very powerful, powerful read. Next was Randomize Your TBR. I randomized my 1950s TBR and just used a random number generator 1 through 10 and landed on Breakfast at Tiffany's for that and read it. The last path I went on was that of the fairies, and the first book for that was a book featuring fae, and that was House of Earth and Blood that I read for that. I picked a chunker for that prompt. Next, again, foiled cover, already covered it. Third book is featuring woodlands, and for that one I read The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes, because it takes place in the hills of Kentucky, which has forest. It's all forested. And then the final book, or the final prompt for the fairy tree, was a book outside your comfort zone, and for that I read Lolita. And it's a book about a pedophile who rapes a 12-year-old girl for 2 years. So that should be outside of everybody's comfort zone. I hated that book. Anyway, that is everything from this wrap-up. I am sorry it was so long. Also, before I peace out, I want to introduce you to my new friend. My 2020 mascot, the dumpster fire. Isn't he cute? He's going to live right back here on my bookshelf, and everybody can look at his cute ass and remember what a dumpster fire this year is. Thanks for being here. See you next time.